Hi everyone. In this module, we're talking about lighting calculations and specifically the lumen method. All right. But there's one more piece to this puzzle, and that is how far apart should you space your luminaires? Many, or in fact most, lighting designs aim to place a relatively even amount of ambient light throughout a space for general use. All right. So once you've determined your target illumination level and you've made your preliminary luminaire selection, how are you going to lay out the plan? The answer is you need to find the spacing interval, or SI, and that's the maximum distance you want to put between each of these luminaires. There's a couple of factors to consider when finding that spacing interval, and one is the ceiling height or mounting height of the luminaire, and the other one is the spacing criterion, or SC, for your luminaire. Why do we care about spacing our luminaires properly? Well, if your lights are too far apart, they're going to look like spotlights or hot spots, big shadows in between each other. And if they're actually too close, the lighting can wash out the room or create glare, and the space will be overlit. We're going to use the spacing criterion, or SC, to help determine your spacing intervals. The spacing criteria is specific to a luminaire, all right, and you can see that in our example right here. We've got four different types of luminaires with different beam spread. You can see that each of them probably has a different spacing criterion. Right. The spacing criterion is a number, it's a ratio. It's usually between 0.5 and 1.5, and it's provided to you by the manufacturer on your cut sheet or spec sheet. So the equation that we're going to use here is that spacing criterion, that ratio number, all right, times the mounting height will give you the maximum spacing interval. That's as far apart as you want to place your luminaires. That mounting height, remember, is going to be measured from the work surface, all right, typically 30 inches above the floor, to the bottom of your luminaire, wherever it is mounted. Let's throw another wrench into our discussion here and realize that not all luminaires throw their light in a symmetrical pattern. All right, let's take a look at the light distribution for this example. You can see that it distributes light differently in the length along this luminaire versus 90 degrees from that perpendicular across the length. All right, so your spacing criteria will often be given in two separate numbers. All right, the parallel or along number along the length of a linear luminaire, okay, or the perpendicular or across number in against the length of a linear luminaire. Right, and I've color coded these in this little lecture. All right, so your along direction is the red one, and the across is the blue. In the textbook example, the spacing criteria is given in the photometric data. That would typically be in your spec sheet or cut sheet for your luminaire. And you can see it right here. So spacing criteria along is 1.1 and across is 1.3. So remember that along is in this direction, and you can see it in the photo here in the length of this luminaire, and across would be perpendicular to that. The spacing intervals are going to be the center to center distance between the fixtures. So we're measuring to the exact center of a luminaire in your plan view. It can be different in the along direction and the perpendicular or across direction. And so for the textbook example, that we've got two different calculations. For the parallel or along calculation, the spacing criteria times the mounting height is going to equal about 8¼ feet. We'll round it down and use 8-foot spacing. For the perpendicular or across direction, your spacing interval will be 9 3/4 feet. And so we'll go ahead and round that to 10 feet spacing. When you place these in a room, what does that look like? It looks like this. All right, we are measuring from center to center. Okay, that's those tiny green dots right there. And so we're going to space our luminaires 8 feet in the along direction and 10 feet in the across direction. One thing you want to watch out for, don't put your luminaires too close to the walls. And you'll see an example here. Here's a row of downlights. All right, and this one is correctly done. You see that it gives a nice even wash. All right, on the right-hand side, you see that even though these luminaires are spaced correctly, this last one is too close to the wall and it gives a really ugly hot spot. All right, so the rule of thumb here is to use half of the center to center spacing interval in between the last luminaire and the wall. Now, what are you going to do if you don't have any spacing criteria? All right, the manufacturer didn't give it to you. You have no idea. How are you going to space your luminaires? Well, there's a commonly used rule of thumb. All right, and that says to space your luminaires at your ceiling height divided by 2. This is really commonly used in residential work. All right, so for example, in a room with 8-foot ceilings, you would space, for example, a recessed can LED light at 4 feet on center, and they would be 2 feet from the walls. All right. In a room with a 10-foot ceiling, you would space your luminaires. 10 divided by 2 is 5 feet on center, and they'd be 30 inches or 2.5 feet from the walls. All right, everybody, I hope we've demystified the idea of placing your luminaires within a space for general ambient lighting. All right, remember that everything that we've talked about has been for that overall even wash of light. Thanks.